Hello and welcome. So today's video we're going to go through Directus on GCP. There's a few prerequisites that you need to be aware of. You need to have a GCP account, VS Code with a Docker extension, Docker desktop and the GCloud SDK. I'm running all this on Windows 10. So let's get started. So Directus have developed a pretty good blog. So Trust Jamin is his name. Ran a pretty good blog on how to get this up and running. So I've already created a Directus project there, Directus project Sonray, and we're going to be deploying Cloud SQL first and also Cloud Run to run the application, and there'll also be the artifact registry as well. Okay, so let's get started with this. First things first, let's go and get Cloud SQL up and running. We're going to create a Postgres database in our Directus project-Sonray. So let's create an instance first. And we'll choose PostgreSQL. This will be version 15. I'll deploy the latest version. We'll also need to enable the API. And we'll call this Directus-DB. So the admin account will be Postgres as per standard, and we'll just put in a fairly simple and easy password that we can remember. Because this is just a demo instance, we'll choose the enterprise version of the Cloud SQL edition, because when this deploys, it can be pretty expensive. I mean, already you can see there with Enterprise Plus on the right hand side, we've got 8 vCPUs, 64 gig of memory and 250 gig of storage. So let's reduce that right down to the bare minimum we can go. So choose Enterprise. Out of this, we'll choose the Sandbox. There's a few other options later on as well, but you can also compare editions as well, just to see what they look like with regards to their features and their resources. And you can already see there it's reduced the resources down quite considerably when choosing Enterprise and Sandbox. Now we're going to deploy this in a single zone in the Australia Southeast 1 region, so that's in Sydney. That's a tier 2 region. And now we'll have a look at the configuration options as well. This will allow us to reduce the resources down even further. So we can see there the machine configuration and the storage. We just choose the minimum storage there, but here you can actually reduce even the dedicated cores down, or you can go with shared cores, which we'll do in this case, being just a demo instance, to try and reduce the cost of this as much as possible. Still, this will probably end up costing about $100 or so Australian dollars a month if you kept this up and running. So there are all the options that we need to go with. So we'll create that instance. Won't take too long to get that up and running. Once that's created, effectively we'll have a PostgreSQL version 15 instance there ready to go, called Directus-DB, and the database will just be called Postgres. We'll also save this connection name, just so we've got a copy of that. Some of those details come in handy when configuring up the GCloud for pushing the container image in, as well as the connectivity back to Cloud SQL from Cloud Run. Okay, so that covers the Cloud SQL database setup. We'll now get on to setting up the Docker container. This is where we'll use VS Code as well as the GCloud SDK Cloud Shell. So So I've got Docker Desktop already downloaded and running. If you don't know how to do that, just go to this link here. We'll put the link in the description and do the Docker for Desktop for Windows. And obviously you've got to already have Windows for Linux installed as well, so there's some system requirements there you need to be aware of. And once that's installed and up and running, you'll then be able to use Docker. Now we're going to use VS Code for Docker, and there is an extension for that, so we'll put this link in the description as well. Just search for Docker in the extensions tab and you'll be able to find that. Now, if you're not familiar with Docker, there is actually a good instruction here as well, and I'll put the link in the description too, on how to build a Docker app with VS Code. So this is pretty good. Actually, it'll get you up and running, and at least get you started with the basics of how to use Docker through VS Code. Okay, so now that we've got that down pat, let's have a look at VS Code and we'll get started. We need to create a Docker file. So we can start creating a Docker file just by going through the command prompt. So the Docker file is what really gives the instructions to Docker as to what the image needs to look like, what it needs to build. And we'll actually use VS Code to generate the bare bones Docker file for us. We're already in the directory that we want to be in, and if we go Control-Shift-P, we'll be able to show all the commands and run the Docker command that we need. You can see there we've got Docker running in VS Code, the Docker extension. And so what we need to do is build that Docker file first off. So Control-Shift-P, and it's just be that first one there, Docker add Docker files to workspace. We'll click that, and we'll then choose Other after this. And this will then create the Docker files, or the Docker file at the outset. We'll replace those values there with what is in the instruction for getting the most recent Docker image, which in this instruction is 10.10.4. So we'll just copy that and paste that into that file. We can get rid of all that other stuff. Paste it. We'll save that as well. And now we can actually use the next step there, which is actually building that container image. So we can copy that 10.10.4 image, copy that and run that in the terminal of VS Code. So we're just using the bash terminal here. Obviously Docker's already up and running in the background, so we can just paste that in. Here's Docker Desktop, making sure that's running. And so what this will do now is this will simply build this container image for us. And the next step will be getting Google Cloud Artifact Registry up and running. So that's now built that image. And so what we're going to do now is go onto Google Cloud and get that image loaded into the Artifact Registry. So we'll create a repository in there. Let's go across to Google Cloud, go into Artifact Registry. And once that's up and running, we'll create a new repository in here where we can push that container. So we've got to enable the API first. Important note here is we'll actually be using less than the paid tier. We'll be in the free tier, so that's good news. So we'll give this a name, Directus repo, and of course it's in the Docker format, and we'll leave that standard. Region, we'll want to put this in Australia Southeast 1 as where everything else is deployed. Won't have to worry about any labels. We'll just use the Google managed encryption key, and when we clean up the policies, we'll make sure delete artifacts, and now we can just create that. Once that's created, we'll then have our repo ready to push that container image from our local machine onto the artifact registry. So we'll give that a few seconds to create that repository for us, and there we go. So we can see the Directus repo there. So now we can switch across to our GCloud console, and we can run some GCloud commands and also some Docker commands from our GCloud client. So we've just installed the GCloud SDK, and we've got that running through the command prompt. This is Windows. Obviously, if you're on a Mac, your steps are going to be a little bit different. But let's bring that across. We're already in the directory that we created before we started the demo. And first off, we just want to authenticate into GCloud, so we'll just run the GCloud auth login. That'll open up a tab in our browser to authenticate and sign in. So we'll just sign in. I'll allow that. And now we're good to go. Switch back to our GCloud SDK shell. And next up, we want to switch to the project. So in our case, it's Directus -project-sonray. So we'll just GCloud config set project and then the project name. Directus-project-sonray. This will switch us through to that project. And next we can authorize Docker as well for that project. So another GCloud command. This is just GCloud auth configure Docker. We'll just paste that in, just making sure that the region is correct. So in this case, Australia Southeast 1 is the region we're using. In the documentation, we'll notice that's US Central 1, but whatever one you want to use. And so we're now authorized for Docker into that region for that project. Next, we need to add a tag. So I've already got Docker running on the laptop, on the machine. So let's add a Docker tag there, which is 10.10.4, the version. And we just need to make sure some of those are correct. Some of those items in the configuration script there, Australia Southeast 1, and the Directus project-sonray, and the Directus repo. And so now we've got that tag set, we're now ready to push that image in that we created earlier. And so let's do a push of that image with that tag to that project, and obviously Southeast 1 to that repo, and there's the tag. So this will take that image that we created on our local machine here, and it will push that up to GCP to that artifact repository that we created earlier. Once that's done, we'll then switch across to that. And have a look at that repo, and we should have our image in there. There's the Directus folder. There we go. So there's the image, obviously with the right tag, 10.4.10.10.4. So that's getting the Docker file there. So now we're up to the next step, and we're going to deploy that container image using GCP Cloud Run. Now, there was one step here that I did remove in their variables, which we'll get to in a minute, but let's go down to Cloud Run. And we'll create a new service. And we'll use artifact registry, of course. Now we want to be able to choose the image in that artifact registry, so when we click on that, it'll pop up with a selection list of where to pull that from, and we've only got one in this project, so we'll just select that. It's the current version, and we'll call this Directus Cloud. Now the region, we want to run this in the same region as our Cloud SQL, of course. Now you note there that it says Tier 2 pricing. So Tier 2 pricing is more expensive than Tier 1. We'll allow unauthenticated invocations. In this case, we'll use one instance. I mean, you can just start with 0, but in this case, we'll just always leave it at 1. This point in time, just so it's always on. Use port 880 for connecting through to it. All the other settings are pretty much okay. We'll go to the variables and secrets now, and this is where we add the variables from the documentation, so the key, the secret, the admin email, the admin password, etc. And so we'll just add some values in here that are pretty simple and basic. So you may want to move some of these if you're going to deploy this more in a production sense to Google Secrets, rather than having them here, I guess, in plain text, so to speak. And so this is the admin email. So once Directus is up, this will be the admin account that gets created out of the box on Directus. So when you log in, this will be the admin. And add the password from the documentation. You can see that there, it's in plain text, obviously. Not great for security. So we're going to use Postgres. That's our Cloud SQL database type. And this is the DB host, though in this case, you need to make sure that it is named correctly, this value. So it'll be Cloud SQL dash your project name, :, the region you're in, : then the database name. So in our case, we're Directus project -Sonray, and we're in Australia Southeast 1, and the database name is Directus DB, or the database host, I should say. So the port, the standard port for Postgres is 5432, and the database name was called Postgres. And now we need to add a user to access that database, and again we've just got the out-of-the-box admin we'll use for this, Postgres. we also set, again, just a fairly unsecure and pretty simple password for this. Just the old password 123 exclamation mark. And this is where we won't put in that DB SSL reject unauthorized. I found that actually got an error for us when we were deploying this the first time. So the error that comes out when it tries to run that container is the server does not support SSL connections. So we have I've removed that variable, at least at this stage, from the configuration, from the variables. So we just need to go ahead with those 10 variables, and we don't want to put that SSL variable in from the documentation there. You can see there the variables in the documentation, the key, the secret, etc., etc. The login, the Postgres database type, obviously where the host is, which you'll need to update according to where you're hosted and the name of your project, etc. And the name of the database, which is Postgres, the user then that logs into the database, and whatever password you chose for that, and the last one we're not going to put in there. We found that caused problems. Okay, so I think we're pretty much good to go to be able to create this instance. Let's just check a few other settings here. Oh, we'll adjust the maximum number of instances. We don't want this to go ballistic and cost us a fortune, so let's just reduce that down to 1 just in case. And this is where we connect Cloud SQL through to the Cloud Run instance, and we'll just choose the only one we've got. And now we've got to actually enable the API as well to allow that connection to occur between the two services. So once that's done, I think we're good to go. Okay. So let's hit create there. And this takes a couple of minutes to create. We've sped that video up a little bit for you. All right. So there we go. It's up and running. We've got our URL. So let's open that up in a new tab and see if we're cooking with gas. All right, here we go. So we'll now use that admin email, admin account that was created with the instance. So let's plug that in. And of course that super secure password. Let's just pop that in as well. Sign in. Don't worry about saving that. And there we go. So Directus is up and running, connected through to Cloud SQL. You can create new users and everything else. Now you can also connect cloud storage through to this as well. We won't go through that in this demonstration, but those instructions are pretty good, and that's how simple and easy it is to get Directus on GCP up and running. So thank you for listening, and have a good day.